is so interesting going on the internet. Like,
Yeah,
it's
I mean, that's a really basic way of putting it, but I do agree with you there. Hi there, my name is Ash Wayling from WellPlayed, and I got to speak to Oliver Hollis-Leick, the creative director of Space Marine 2. In our time together, we spoke a bit about how the story came to be, what kind of customization options people really want, and most importantly, what comes next. Such as what can we expect from new operations missions, what is this new enemy going to do to us, and finally, when are we going to get to play as a chaplain? So join me, brothers, as we look over the future of Space Marine 2. Oliver, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. You have the role of creative director on a project like Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. Does it come with all the phenomenal power that I assume it does?
It is a position of immense responsibility, and when we signed the deal 4.5 years ago, I was aware that we were venturing forth into treacherous territory. There was great reward out there. You know, there was huge potential, but this is a game that people have been waiting for by now 13 years. People have been clamoring for this game. A lot of people very, very invested in Titus's story and the game as a whole, and not to mention all of the Warhammer fans out there who wanted a faithful representation of their universe, of their beloved universe. And so it was a bit like kind of walking through a sacred space and knowing that you had to tread carefully. And there were so many choices to be made. It was completely open ground. There was no story that we'd inherited from Relic apart from the ending of that game. We didn't know why Titus was resistant to the warp. We didn't know what had happened to him. There was nothing past the end of that game that existed. So we had to make a lot of big choices. And the story was the first choice. The game was more straightforward. So the game director is called Dmitry Grigorenko. He's very experienced, very capable. He was the game director on World War Z. So he had a good grasp of how to handle this, and we had a great template for the gameplay in the first game. So his job was more about evolving that into a modern day experience, but without kind of breaking it. But in terms of the narrative, every choice we made could be hit or miss. And the fans are very, very passionate about this universe, and so a miss could result in some serious backlash.
Oh yes. In fact, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a community of people more ready to complain about things than Warhammer fans. And I say that with love, because obviously I am one, so...
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing, is that their kind of reactivity comes from how precious this is to them. It really is precious, and they protect it very, very passionately. And so the first thing we did is just do a massive amount of research. I am completely engrossed myself in all of the fiction, all of the novels, and as much as I could to soak that up.
So, in what ways did Games Workshop work with you to try and make sure you had all of the information needed? It's like, was it a case of them shipping you novels? Was it a case of them giving you rule books? Was it a case of them sending literal models for you to look at?
All of the above. So they gave us access to all of the codexes of every faction in the game, plus some others in case we were interested in that. So, we did our digging first. They sent models and miniatures. They sent the team loads of models and miniatures, which resulted in a monthly painting club at the office, where people would literally, there was prizes for the best painted miniatures. And
wow.
People I'd worked with for years, and was, especially because during COVID, it was all like this. It was all Zoom and Discord and all that.
Oh, yeah.
And you would see in the background of people's shots, like paint pots, like ever increasing through each meeting, more and more paint,
yes.
and more miniatures and brushes and things. And
you can see the grip taking them over more and more. So I was gonna ask if some poor intern had to put together 1,000 points of Tyranids just for you to understand how all the models looked, but it sounds like you did it sort of as a group.
Yeah, well, the art team, the modeling team, they were it was really important to Games Workshop that we remained faithful to the miniatures. So, we were like scanning these tiny little miniatures and then enlarging them on the screen and looking at them in excruciating detail, go, okay, look at this. And we'd send our models to Games Workshop, our 3D models, and they would say, these tendons on these Tyranids here should be under the top layer of tendons, so you need to move that underneath. And this, you made that color, but it's actually this color. And so we had like, the heavy metal painting team commenting on our miniature, on our models to make sure that they reflected the miniatures.
Wow, that must have been a really cool sort of feedback process then. Was it easy? Well, sorry, I'm not going to say easy. Was it easier as sort of working with, game models, having access to something physical that you could look at?
Definitely. There's two great reasons why it's good to work from the miniatures. Firstly, it's a reminder of the origin of this entire thing. It's a reminder that this was a game that was created to be played on the tabletop, and it reminds you of how, I was playing this game in the Warhammer stores age 13, 14, 15, and I had miniatures. I remember going to, because I actually grew up in the same town where the headquarters is.
Oh,
so
really?
I remember going and seeing, I grew up round the corner from it. And so it's a bizarre coincidence, but I went and I saw that Space Marine statue, and I remember looking at it and going, wow, that thing that I've been playing with, these Space Marines that I imagined in full size, here it is in front of me, and it's terrifying. And so having miniatures on hand for the team was a great reminder of that experience, of that collective experience of everybody rolling dice and screaming and shouting and like imagining where it was happening. So that was a great thing. And second of all, it just allowed us to maintain kind of the tangible physical connection to the universe rather than just a kind of intellectual one.
A passionate level of accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's excellent. So, I mean, from that point, I guess when it comes to adapting something like this, you mentioned that you sort of had a clean slate, apart from the fact that the first game existed, but there was no clues as to what to do next. You sort of had an open book that you could work with. I mean, within Games Workshop's sort of guidelines, I guess.
Yes, well, so one of the easiest choices to make was to choose the Tyranids as an enemy faction, because we on World War Z had developed the swarm tech, which was just so capable by that point. And the Tyranids were just begging to get hold of that thing. And so that was a pretty easy choice. So then we had to think about, okay, well, the thing is the Tyranids don't have any characters. You can't interact with them. They are like, a plague of locusts. So we needed to decide how to get another kind of antagonist into the game that would allow us to tell a more complicated story. So we chose the factions quite early on, and then it was like, okay, what is this story about? What are we trying to tell here? And I was always very strongly on the side of, Titus is like a lost son. At the end, in fact, the darker his story was after the end of that first game, the better our story would be. So we chose that he'd been, he'd been taken away, interrogated, tortured, like Guy Fawkes trying to get a confession out of this guy. And then not ever really getting an answer they could be happy with. The Inquisition put him in the Death Watch and said, if you prove yourself to us, we'll send you back to the Ultramarines. And yet they didn't. For 100 years, they said, no, not yet. We still don't trust him. And so as Gilliman was returning, to life in the universe, and the whole universe was changing and things were shifting, and he was sort of reminding people that the Codex was just a set of guidelines, which is exactly what Titus has always said.
Which is Titus's credo.
Titus waited, exactly. And Titus had been waiting for that call, come home. Gilliman's back, he's bringing you home. And it never came. And so for decades more, he remained this forgotten, lost son in the Death Watch, where people come and go and they die, and they come and go and they die. There wasn't the same brotherhood of the Ultramarines there. And so I think it hardened him and hardened him and hardened him. And so we chose to tell the story of a man who's been away for so long, who was forgotten and lost, that he's forgotten what brotherhood feels like. And this is his chance to remember, because that's what Space Marines are about. They're about a brotherhood. So that was one of the big decisions we made early on.
And I mean, the game's been out for a little while now, and the reception's been really positive, but do you feel that people are happy with what you've done with the story? Because, I mean, there's a lot of positivity around it, and sort of now people are asking what comes next.
It's so interesting going on the internet.
I mean, that's a really basic way of putting it, but I do agree with you there.
Yes, it's you can open one door and find yourself, stuck in a pit of snakes, or you can open another door and there's like a cheering audience there, and it's a very, very strange thing. So, I've seen people who love the story. I've said that it brought them to tears. It said that they were cheering in their chair, and I've seen people say they absolutely hated the story. And so I feel like it has reached enough people for it to be a success, and you're never going to please everyone. And the funny thing about this franchise is that people feel a lot of ownership over it, and so we're getting people who are like demanding what the next faction be that we face in the game, like really taking a stand and say, I want Necrons, I don't care if you don't put Necrons in the game, it's a total failure. And you're like, all right, okay, well.
I think part of that comes down to just Warhammer as a hobby it's a very tangible thing. I mean, it doesn't take much to physically pick up your favorite thing and look at it and react to it. So people's attachment is visceral because they almost feel like they do have their hands on it. So it's just passion. It's okay. But I will ask on that point. Obviously, there is the point of factions and people want this and people want that. But I have done my research and I've seen how you've answered some of these questions, so I don't have to retread it. But just once more, just for the people in the back, when the roadmap says a new enemy, you clearly mean it's not a whole new enemy faction.
Yeah, exactly. A new enemy type within the existing factions, yes.
Sure.
Thank you for clarifying that.
It's okay. I still run into people asking that question, even though I'm sure I've seen it answered in a dozen different places, all with the same answer. But on that point, I do have to ask, when you say a new enemy, are we talking about something scary? It's not just going to be something a case of, hey, look, it's a Zangor with a gun. It's going to be something quite unique and interesting and scary.
Yeah. Let me just have a look at because I know what the enemy is.
Really? Okay.
And I'm just gonna, yeah, I know exactly what it is. And yes, it is definitely not a Hormigant with a slightly different gun. It is definitely a new enemy type that will require new strategies, new approaches to combat.
Okay. Now, obviously, the journalist in me knows if I ask what it is, you're not going to tell me. But is it Minoris, Majoris, or Extremis?
I'm not going to answer that, but all I will say is it will definitely, you'll have to adjust your play style to accommodate it. Yeah, it's not a trivial enemy for sure.
Okay, so it's not Minoris though.
Well, I mean, if that's what you inferred from my vague answer, then maybe you're right.
Touche, sir. Very well played. Well, I suppose on that point then, just some other questions are a little bit straightforward when it comes to sort of the ongoing evolution of the game. New operations missions are coming. The current operations missions are all part of the story. They're part of the campaign of what's happening on Avarax, Kadaku, and Demirium. Do we expect that future operations missions are also going to be part of this same storyline? Is it part of the same timeline that we're dealing with?
So, an interesting question that's come up a lot is people have assumed that because we don't go back to the Tyranids after Avarax, that somehow they've just magically been dealt with, and some people say you couldn't clean up the Tyranid threat that easily, and that's true. Even if it's a splinter fleet, the battle for Avarax was just one battle. That whole planet is under siege from hive ships. There are spores raining down day and night. That is a serious situation. We saw the battle for the Astropath Relay. We didn't see those other battles in other hive cities on the same world. And so at the end of the game, there is still a lot of work to do, and the second company had to reroute to deal with the new, most serious threat. But as soon as that's over, we hear Akaran saying, "A company dismissed," and that's because they're all running off to their ships to go back down to Aberrax and fight the massive numbers of Tyranids that are still down there.
You got to get back to the
and
previous
there will
mess.
still be 1,000 suns. Yes, exactly. Yeah, the other fire in the other kitchen. But they, the 1,000 Suns won't have just accepted defeat and shrunk away into the warp. There will be a lot of mess left over. I mean, the amount of corruption still left on Aberrax is severe.
Sure, and heretics are always scrambling for power, so there's always room for more chaos. So I suppose as a secondary point on that one, though, like obviously not anytime soon, but down the line with how operations missions work, is there the provision that you could possibly do an operations mission that's outside of this current timeline, sort of elsewhere in the galaxy, a different tile set, go to a frigid ice planet and deal with Tyranids there? Is it something that could be explored?
I mean, anything's possible. In order to do that, we would need to create a lot of new assets. We need new art. We'd need new. I mean, there's the story aspect to it, because all of the operations continue to have their own narrative. It won't just be like, new location, it won't just be new maps. We've already recorded the voiceover for these missions with the actors. We've had them in the studio. We've done that stuff. They are real. They are new operations levels, not just new maps. And so that stuff is relatively straightforward to do. We can make use of our assets. We put them in all different order. Like make them. You get the point. And but creating a totally new location with new terrain, that would be more resource intensive. So I'm not saying that we won't do it. What I'm saying is that it would take longer and take our attention away from potentially the easier, more satisfying options.
No, that makes perfect sense. Well, I mean, in that case, you did, obviously, the tail ends, and no spoilers here in case you haven't played the game, people watching, but it does obviously say that Titus's story is done for now, and you did mention elsewhere that there is a chance that more story content is planned. Is that something that's going to be, like, way down the track, or is it something that is percolating at the moment?
So, the Titus's story... it's difficult to say anything without spoiling it.
Sure.
So, at the end of the game, one chapter in Titus's life has been resolved. We immediately suggest that a new chapter is opening, and that chapter could be as dark, if not darker, than the one he's just lived through. And so that,
poor guy.
There's definitely, I mean, it's Warhammer 40,000. Everybody's having a shitty time. But
they don't call it grimdark
guys,
for nothing.
Exactly. These guys, the responsibility, the weight on their shoulder is immense, and so it's not over for him.
Excellent. So we will see him again, but we'll have to wait and see in what way.
Yes, exactly.
Now, just from a visual standpoint, one of the most exciting parts of Warhammer 40,000 is obviously the fact that once you get into the operations mode, once you're in sort of the PvP mode, it's open slather to craft your own marine, and people are reacting to it in a great way. I know I personally love it. I've got friends, we've started color coordinating, we're getting quite fashionista up in this, it's pretty great. But there are a couple of questions that keep floating around the internet that I just keep seeing it asked, and it's probably everyone's first question or their second question, so I feel there's no better candidate than you to ask it, but why can't we color our helmet lenses? Was that a Games Workshop decision, or is it just something technology driven?
So there's definitely no good technological reason why we couldn't color the lenses. I'll be honest and say that I'm not aware of that, of when that conversation happened within because a lot of it was being handled by our art department. So our art department had their own chain of connection with Games Workshop, and they were submitting things and making choices about things, and I would often see the results of them and comment on them if I wasn't happy with them. But I think in this case, it could be a number of things. It could be that it would have brought us. I mean, that doesn't make any sense technologically, because if you can choose the color of your armor, you would naturally be able to choose the color of your lenses. So it may have been a restriction that was imposed upon us that you shouldn't be able to do that. It may change in future. We may be able to do that. So I'm not exactly sure, I have to say.
Sure. No, excellent. I think people just be happy to hear that it might happen, because I just see lots of people going, I need my blue eyes.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, this whole hobby is about customization, and there are no restrictions on what you can paint your miniatures at home. And so that's the difficult thing when you make a game which has such a high profile, is that it tends to get more limited.
Absolutely. The next thing people ask is wanting to color their bulwark robes. I don't know if there's a limitation on that, but if you want to feed that back off to people, lots of people want to. I think they're leaning into their particular chapter, either having black robes or white robes. So that's just me from the community, from me to you. The other argument is for the old style helmets. Now, I have seen you mention, obviously, in relation to people wanting the Mark 8 helmet, which has sort of the pig snout, rebreather on the front of it.
The grill, yeah.
It's what we see. The answer I saw given was the fact that Primaris don't wear that helmet, which is true. But if I could offer just a simple counter-argument, and I promise that'll be it. Ultramarine Sternguard veterans. There is a box of miniatures where one of the Primaris Sternguard veterans actually has a Mark 8 style helmet. So, is it a case of Games Workshop said no, or is it just something that wasn't explored up until the time the game actually got, into production?
It could be a combination of the two. Games Workshop have their own make their own choices about their IP and their franchise.
Oh, yes.
And those choices are not always popular, and the whole Primaris debate has been extremely hot topic.
I was there for it.
So they are of course, as any big company is, trying to sort of keep a hold of what's acceptable, what's kind of canonical, and all of that kind of thing. And so we as a developer, using their license, are required to abide by their choices. And I think that's fair enough, because it's difficult in that there are many fans who've probably been around for longer than the employees who are currently making those decisions at Games Workshop. And they feel very passionate about this universe that they've been in for decades. I completely get that. But I don't want to blame Games Workshop, because I think that their choices are very difficult anyway. That any manager of a franchise has got a hell of a job cut out for them.
Without a doubt, especially like you said, Warhammer as a franchise, especially 40k, decades upon decades, and iterations upon iterations. If you were to try and please every fan, you would be here for decades and decades and decades.
Yes, and it just means that often these decisions are made with great caution. That's all it is, because you put it in and somebody says, yes, I got my helmet, and then a whole group of people over here go, how dare you put that helmet in? That's not regulation. And so I think we have this great page on Focus's website, the ideas page, where people can submit what they want. And if we get a lot of requests saying, for God's sake, please give us a Mark 8 helmet, then we can go to Games Workshop and say, look, this is what the demand is. What are you guys thinking? And then things might change. They really might.
Well, I've actually been looking at the Focus Together platform, and it's amazing just for once, just seeing a community for a post-game release instead of being a random forgotten Discord somewhere or a subreddit. And the ideas section is amazing. And the incredible thing about the ideas section is obviously that you guys at Saber can actually tick things off and categorize them. And within that area, there's actually two things that have already been flagged as must-have. And one of them is new classes for the game. Now, I understand there's a lot of subtext here that it's not a promise that that's going to happen. It's more of a case that the team agrees, yes, this is a great idea. But is there stuff
Mhm.
that you guys looked at? Is there perhaps class ideas that might have been looked at during development that didn't quite make it into the final product that are still on the back burner somewhere that you guys are excited about?
The problem is you always have to choose what you're going to do with the time that you've got. And we could have added a year to production. We could have added 2 years to production. And it's amazing. It's amazing how simple people out there think it is to
It
add
isn't.
something.
Well, you guys were supposed to release Space Marine 2 in 2023. So there was
Yes.
already... it was just like, take your time. We understand.
Exactly. It's about quality. We've gone for a balance between quality and quantity, but we had a bar set for quality that we just were not prepared to go below.
Yeah.
And there are bugs in the current release, and we're working very hard to fix them. But imagine 9 months less time to develop this game. That's so. In terms of classes, I will refer you to World War Z, where we added a drone master class after release, and there's absolutely the possibility and potential of adding classes to this. It's just about, as with everything, it's like saying, well, what do people want the most, and what do we have the resources to do in the time that we've got? Because it's got to be good. If we're going to add a new class, we've got to add the proper model, the proper customization options for it, the proper animations for it, because it will have its own unique finishes and all that stuff. You imagine a chaplain with a Crozius, that's a totally different combat mechanic. It's got to be balanced. They've got to fit within a three-man team, and they've got to be able to take down the enemies and play their role. So there's the balancing thing, but then also
you need to nail that same level of fantasy that you've sort of poured into everything else to make sure it matches the expectations of people who love this property. So
exactly,
I understand it's no small task.
And people say, "Oh, just copy the animations over from this guy to that guy. Oh, just resize him. Just make him from big to small." It's like, yeah, but his whole walk cycle will be off. He'll be like,
a chaplain's not going to walk the same way as an assault. He's got purpose, and you can't swing a Crozius the way you swing a chainsword. That's just ridiculous.
Exactly. exactly. So it is, there are a couple of, I personally would love to play as a chaplain. I just absolutely love that. And
same.
There are, Librarian is another one that would be absolutely amazing to play as. But again, that is a totally different mechanic. It's very tricky.
That would be a whole different kettle of psychic fish, yes.
Exactly.
Now, in doing my research, Oliver, obviously I saw that you have an amazing background that consists of doing a lot of really amazing things, including motion capture, and you've worked on things like Iron Man 2, you've worked on stuff like Harry Potter, and at one point you did the motion capture for Master Chief, which sounds incredible as well. Or was that just working on Halo? No, it was Master Chief. Yeah,
it was for Halo Anniversary, so we were re-recording all of the animation for the game, and that's how I met Saber.
Amazing. Okay, well, thank you, Master Chief, for getting you in this position to deliver such a stellar product. So my final question then is just simply, I assume that you are involved with the motion capture for Space Marine 2. Did you at one point suit up and do some animations for the game? Would we see you somewhere?
I did wear the suit. When we needed additional Space Marines, it's very hard to cast for Space Marine. Very, very hard. Because it's not just a big heavy dude, it's like a big heavy special forces dude.
Yeah.
And my experience with motion capture helped me to train the actors that we were working with. I directed the shoots with John Dower, who's our cinematics director. And he was said to me, "Ollie, you just do it. You know what you're doing. Just get in there and do it." And so a couple of times I did, and I enjoyed it. But yeah.
Excellent. So, hot tip for playing a Space Marine: it's not just being a big dude.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Well, Oliver, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for just letting me have a glimpse into just the slavish attention to detail and the hard work that went into crafting Space Marine 2. For me, I know it was personally very much worth the wait, and I'm very, very keen to see how this develops moving forward. You believe I will be there every step of the way. So, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ash. It was lovely talking to you, and if possible, it would be great to get Dmitry Grigorenko's name in there, because he doesn't have an online presence. He's just not interested in. He's just not interested in that roulette wheel, and so. But he has worked unbelievably hard and deserves the largest share of credit for making this game happen. And he has worked hours I can't even imagine to bring it to life. He's a huge 40k fan and very passionate about this. So if there's any way of mentioning him and his hard work, that would be wonderful.
Front and center, I will see him as another one of the Emperor's Chosen who worked very hard.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Yeah, very much so.
And I look forward to that chaplain if you ever add it.
Me too.
And with that, a huge thank you to all the people who've made it this far. A massive thank you to Oliver for taking the time to share his insights with me today. And a big tip of the hat to Dmitry Grigorenko, who has made the wise decision to stay off the internet, but still did a lot to make Space Marine 2 happen. Keep your eye on well-played.com.au for more gaming insights and news. My name is Ash, and I'll see you in the next one. So now you've caught me. I've dressed up like a tart just for you.